USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to the Weekend Review podcast for Monday, November 23rd, 2020. I'm Ed Trefzger along with Jim Connelly. Jim, there were more games postponed last weekend than actually happened, it seems, and this really has to be very concerning. I mean, we already knew about Maine, UMass, UVM, UConn, that whole thing. But then on Friday, they had decided to move the BC UNH series from Friday to Saturday, Sunday, and then on Saturday canceled the whole thing. That's really got to have people concerned in New England.
I mean, certainly, and across the country right now, you know, we've also, you know, heard that Colorado College had to stop play because they had some positive cases. Quinnipiac, they have paused play. They had 2 positive tests. We've had Army with some problems to this point. We just found out just shortly before going on the air that Bemidji State, Minnesota State, they played yesterday, but yesterday being Sunday. Tonight's game, Monday, is going to be postponed because there was a positive case on Minnesota State. So that means potentially that a player that had COVID maybe had a false negative or didn't have the test come back positive that, you know, when he had COVID, might have been on the ice yesterday. So we're in a really, really weird place right now. And it's, you know, I don't want to say that this feels like March 9th all over again. This doesn't feel like everybody's ready to just stop and, you know, put an end to this season. But when you have this many problems right out of the gate, there's no doubt going to be some kind of concern.
Well, and you mentioned Minnesota State and Bemidji, and that one's especially concerning because they had tests before the game on Sunday night, and they all came back negative. And we know at least one player on Minnesota State, but the press release is a little vague. It says positive tests in plural. So that suggests there may be more than one player. But in any case, that is postponed. And yeah, you're right. It does feel like it's going to be difficult to get any sort of a season going with everything that has been paused or postponed so far. There's a big question on what's going to happen with Colorado College. Their announcement last week and a 14-day pause means that takes the pause into the beginning of what was supposed to be play for them in the NCHC bubble. They were supposed to play 4 games in the first 6 days of the bubble. That's up in the air right now, although the NCHC is planning to go ahead with the bubble. So far, the only ones to come away unscathed are the Big Ten.
And, you know, I don't even know if I can make a direct correlation between the Big Ten and just the fact that they've been on campus playing football for a number of weeks now. I think we're 5 weeks into the Big Ten football season. So, you know, sometimes I feel like right now hockey in all of its conferences needs to get momentum to get this carrying through, because every time you have anybody having to push pause on whether it just be their practices, have to postpone a game, have to cancel a game, changing opponents, whatever you might be doing, every time you do that, people, there's a perception problem, and people on the outside are saying, why are they even trying to do this? So, you know, the Big Ten, you know, they've gotten through it in football. I guess they had the Wisconsin had to miss 2 games because of some problems within their own program, but every other program has been able to play their games. We've seen, you know, the other Power 5 conferences get football off the ground. There have been postponements here and there, but it's not, you know, devastating to the sport. College hockey is so small, just 61 teams minus the 8 that have already said they're not going to play this season. So you're talking 53 teams. You know, you have problems in 8 programs, that's more than 15%. I mean, that's a huge number of programs in the grand scheme. And because you have 8 teams that are supposed to be playing 8 other teams, you're impacting 16 teams, I mean, maybe even more than that. Right now, there's no momentum right now for college hockey, and it gets more concerning for me each and every day.
Well, we'll just have to sit by and watch because, it's changing every day, every hour. Just constantly new updates on that. But why don't we go through the conferences and some of what's going on? Let's start with the Big Ten. If you want to take a positive, if there's a silver lining inside this cloud, is that there's a lot more opportunity to watch college hockey on TV. And I've been very pleased to see games on the Big Ten Network. In fact, as we record this on Monday, there are going to be 3 games going on this evening. And if you have Big Ten on your cable or streaming video provider, you're going to be able to watch some great hockey. To me, the big surprise, and I don't mean like I didn't expect it. I mean, the pleasant surprise is how terrific Michigan is.
Unbelievable. I mean, they've won games in different fashion. They're 4-0 out of the gate, playing very well. I guess we had talked about it a little bit last week that, everything we saw was impressive. We talked to Mel Pearson during the USCHO spotlight, and you hear from him. There's a lot of positivity in that room. They have an all-world goaltender in Strauss Mann, and then a good balance between some veterans who are playing well and a lot of rookies that have come in, stepped in, and are playing phenomenally. And, when I look at this Michigan team, they seem to have a lot of things put together. They've won games by blowing out opponents. They've won close games. They seem to not get very rattled. I got to see a little bit of them play over the weekend. I mean, they're a solid team. This is as good a Michigan team as we have seen in a number of years. I kind of had that expectation that it would be Michigan and Minnesota as the 2 top teams. And I think even the preseason coaches poll for the Big Ten said that as well. But we're seeing it play out on the ice because I do believe that Michigan right now is probably the best team in the Big Ten.
And while they swept Wisconsin over the weekend, I don't want to take anything away from the Badgers. I'm still pretty high on them. You have to remember they were without Dylan Holloway as he's off in camp for the Canadian World Juniors team. But Michigan has shown themselves to be above, kind of head and shoulders above most of college hockey just from a couple weekends of play. I was kind of wondering about Arizona State because of the tough time they had with Michigan last weekend. They put up a good fight. It was 0-1-1 against Michigan State, but I feel a lot better about Arizona State now after seeing them against Michigan State over the weekend. It's still a tough road for Greg Powers' team being on the road all the way, but I think they're going to be okay.
I would think so as well. There's still some decent firepower in that lineup. I believe that, having talked to Greg, he feels that this team has the amount of depth that, it needs to be competitive. Said it's the deepest team he's ever had, and that's, going past, an NCAA tournament team and what was presumptively an NCAA tournament team again last year. So I like Arizona State. We keep talking about the uphill battle for them, always playing on the road, always playing Big Ten opponents. This is as tough a schedule as Arizona State will ever put together. There's no doubt about that. Even if they join the Big Ten in the future, they're not going to have to play the entire season on the road. That's something that we absolutely know. So I think that, seeing any sort of improvement, and both nights I thought that they were pretty competitive against Michigan State. So I do think that that's the positive. That's the one thing you have to kind of take away from this, that it is a good thing to see them improving, but tough road ahead. That's a tough road to hoe.
Minnesota, they are off to a terrific start. One player jumped out at me among a team of a lot of talent. That's their forward Sampo Ranta, and he had just this breakaway goal over the weekend that was pretty impressive, just the speed of him. But Bob Motzko's put together a terrific team, and I think you're going to see, I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say Minnesota and Michigan for the Big Ten championship. I think those are the 2 most likely teams. I'm totally impressed by the Gophers.
Yeah, I mean, we knew what they had. It didn't lose much. Their only significant loss was Tyler Nanny. They don't have a ton of experience back on the blue line, but they have some good young freshmen back there who are contributing right away, puck movers, but also defensively very responsible. I didn't think that they gave up a lot this weekend, and it's similar to what we just said about Michigan. They had to win two very different types of games. They were able to kind of pull away on. I'm sorry now, I'm getting my days mixed up. I guess it was Thursday they started to pull away and won a game 4-1 a little comfortably, and then a much closer game on Friday, but still found a way to win. And I think that's, I always look at that as kind of the test of a team. If you're a team that only can play from out front and you don't do well chasing the game, or you don't finish in really close games, that can be concerning. And both of these teams we're now looking at, both Michigan and Minnesota, they seem to be able to close out victories, find ways to win. And I think that, as you said, they've got so much power. And, I was talking with our good friend Jess Myers, who's covers the Gophers out there in the Twin Cities. And I was talking with him last night, and I said, does Sampo Ranta ever score a goal that's not a highlight reel goal? Because he didn't have, I went back and looked, he didn't have a ton of goals last year, but then I thought of the number of times that I watched him score, and they were just, they made plays of the week, whatever it was. And that is Sampo Ranta. He always seems to be able to put a little flash in his game and score those highlight reel goals.
On the losing end both nights was Penn State, and Bob Motzko gave Guy Gadowski a lot of credit in the second game for how Penn State adjusted and how they were able to handle what Minnesota was trying to do to slow them down in the neutral zone. It's a rebuilding year for the Nittany Lions, but like I said about Arizona State, I think they're going to be okay too.
Yeah, I think that Penn State got away from their game in the opener of that series and really let Minnesota dictate the tempo, really let them, basically possess the puck more than a Guy Gadowski team typically would ever let an opponent. So I saw that second night more Penn State hockey. They were playing a little bit more like their typical game. They got a lot more shots on goal. That's kind of been the trademark of Penn State hockey, is the amount of offense that they can create just by shooting the puck. But they definitely got a little bit more off in game two. That they looked more themselves, and it is credit to Guy Gadowski. He's a good coach. I mean, he's always had success no matter where he goes. And even in a rebuilding year, I expect that to be a team that is going to be competitive and may put up a few wins here that shock people.
We're going to cover a few more things, including the NCHC pod, in just a moment. This is the Weekend Review Podcast.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Continuing with the Weekend Review Podcast, I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. The pod, the bubble that the NCHC is going to do for the first half of the season, is going to have everybody in Omaha. This is kind of interesting. Some stipulations on that they've set up.
Yeah, I had a chance to kind of review. They sent out the protocols just this morning, and you and I have both gone through them. Certainly the things that stand out to me is one, that I believe that the NCHC is focused on playing games even if teams have positive cases within their teams. So every team is going to have to do antigen testing. I believe it's every day. That's a pretty quick instant read. I think it's 15 minutes usually to get your results back. Then if you have any positives within the antigen testing, then you have to do the PCR exam. That takes a little bit longer to come back. And during that period, and if that comes back positive as well, that player goes into isolation. There will be select hotel rooms saved basically for these players, and they will not be let out. You're going to have everything brought to you inside your room, and you will truly be isolated from the rest of your team and obviously anybody else that's within the bubble. So what they've come out and said their standard is you need to have 15 healthy skaters, 2 healthy goaltenders, and 2 healthy coaches. That is the standard set forward. That would allow a team to play a game. So it's definitely a different approach than we've seen. If there's been, the BC UNH series, the postponement on Friday wasn't even because of a positive test. It was because of an inconclusive test. So very different barometers, throughout the leagues. But the NCHC, at least in this bubble, believes that they can get these games played safely, and hopefully won't be thrown off by one or two positive tests. There are going to be people out there that argue that that's not the safe approach. That's not the right approach, but it's the approach they're taking. The other one that kind of stood out to me, I mentioned it to you in our email before the show, is that every team, all 8 teams, will travel to Omaha via chartered bus. I would have thought that there would have been chartered airplanes for this, but it will be buses. So some long bus rides from the Mile High City and from Colorado Springs, and maybe not as bad for certain teams, but it's a long ways from Colorado Springs to Omaha, Nebraska. That is not the most comfortable bus ride in the world, but I'm happy to see them trying. I want to see this succeed. I want to see all the leagues succeed in what they're doing here. But it'll be interesting to see if how this goes and if there is any real hiccups within this pod system.
Yeah, on those bus trips, most likely, as I'm hearing from different schools and their protocol, you're going to be talking about 2 buses so that people are not right on top of each other. So you have a little bit more room amongst the players. Used to be Omaha flew and Dean Blaze took the bus, if I recall correctly. But Omaha, they could even take a city bus if they wanted to, since it's right there in their home city. But yeah, lots of bus miles. It's not like going in for a weekend and having to worry about bus legs. You're going to all get there and all be in one place for an awful lot of hockey close together. That kind of leads us into the next topic, and that's having hockey during the week. You got to wonder, people talk about the new normal, and I kind of hate that term because I'd like to get back to the old normal, but some things will no doubt change going forward. You got to wonder if maybe some midweek hockey, or maybe doing some things like they're doing now, where schools are winding up the semester and you have, half of or more of December and quite a bit of January, whether teams are in the future going to try to do something to squeeze in an extra game or 2 a week during that time and try to get that season out of the way. I mean, on the positive side, you're playing when you don't have any distractions from classes and things like that. On the negative side, it also means losing a big part of your fan base, particularly the students. But I will say selfishly, like I mentioned at the beginning, it is nice to be able to see some college hockey just about any night of the week on various video providers, either TV or live stream. So is this going to be something going forward, or are we just kind of guessing at this point?
I don't know. I'm out in Hockey Eastland, where ironically they are playing no midweek games this season because they're trying to use the midweek time for testing protocol and whatnot. But Hockey East has been the league that always has played more midweek games because you could drive from Northeastern over to Boston College in 15 minutes, or even BU up to New Hampshire, or Lowell, down to Providence. You could do those in the midweek, and it wasn't too much of a trip. To see this happen more regularly in a league like the Big Ten will take a lot of planning and a lot of sacrifice, I think, if it's something that we're going to see going forward. When you have a private network, though, like Big Ten Network, it's good to be able to not have to fight against football in the fall. It's good to be able to, have a more flexible week-to-week schedule like you see in men's and women's basketball. I like the midweek games. I will be definitely sitting in front of a TV, or at least have my DVR going tonight, to make sure that I can catch some of the games that are playing on Big Ten Network. I know that NHL Network has had some of their games, and NBC Sports with Notre Dame. I even see ESPN is about to step in and do a few games, I believe, with John Butchergross. So there's a lot there's a lot of content out there, and it's so the exposure for college hockey in a time that you don't have the NHL playing, you don't have a ton of pro sports. Really, all you have is the NFL and the MLS playoffs. That's really all you have in the nation right now for team sports. So I think it's definitely capitalizing on the ability to get more exposure for the sport.
It's also interesting to see programs playing in smaller arenas when they don't need the bigger ones, the Badgers at LeBron Arena, and then catching a little bit of live stream over the weekend, seeing UMass play UConn at Fridas Ice Forum, a building that I was in many times when UConn was in Atlantic hockey. Interesting to see that. But even something like that, a very basic, what seemed like a single camera stream from UConn, it's still nice to get that.
I mean, listen, it's perfect. Find a way, get the games out there so people can watch them. When you can't put fans in your building, you need to have a good alternative. And I look at Hockey East, and I'll credit Steve Metcalf and his staff. They're going to stream every single game for free this year. There's going to be no cost to watch the games. And, you don't want to alienate your fan base because they can't follow their team, or it's more difficult to follow their team. And that was a wise decision, I believe, on Hockey East's part to work with their broadcast partners, NESN and CBS, the CBS Online service, to be able to get those games to the public. And you've got to, this is a time you can lose a lot of the good momentum that hockey has. You didn't have playoffs last year. You didn't crown any champions. You didn't have a Frozen Four. You missed out on all of that sort of stuff. And, you don't want college hockey to fall any further toward the back burner.
We've got to be concerned about the long-term effects of this. And I think, as you mentioned to me before the broadcast, particularly in the NCHC, you've got 6 Ivy League teams, plus you've got RPI and Union. And you already have players transferring out of those schools. You have players putting into the transfer portal. And you also have to be concerned about the future. What do you do if you're a player coming into one of those schools and you see what has happened there? Do you say, I wonder if there will be a season for this team next year? Maybe I should reconsider. Is this something to be concerned about for those schools? And even more so, how does the ECAC handle this with 4 schools committed to playing and 8 schools not? That's not a great position to be in if you're trying to manage and run that league right now.
Yeah, we saw it even before the season began, when you looked at, for many, many, many years, once you got into Harvard, you did not leave. Nobody went and signed an NHL contract early. I think of Ryan Donato being the first guy that did it a few years back. But you don't expect a player to leave Harvard early, and I believe they had either 4 or 5 that left early as soon as kind of everybody kind of got that feeling, hey, there's going to be no season here. We're going to sign in the NHL, and we're going to give ourselves a chance to play. We're going to make hay while we can. We're not going to take a season off. Now that we've had the official postponement, the transfer portal is just full of players from the 8 schools, and they're not. These are not, your fourth line center. These are top players, great goaltenders that are moving on, good goal scorers, the desirable players that, coaches are looking for, at other schools. And, to know that you can start the process here late November, have that player finish his semester, hopefully pass all his classes in the fall, wherever he was enrolled, and then head off to your school and be in your lineup come January 1. I mean, it's a great thing for the teams that are getting these players, but this has a real long-term effect on the Ivy League teams. I think that Ivies, and then add in RPI and Union, you've got some really good players moving around out there right now, and it's not a positive in any way for those teams. And then just the ability to be competitive when you know that these players who you had, 3-4 year plans in place on what they'll be able to still do and add to your program, having them lost, it's you're going to have to, overly recruit in the next few years just to make up. It's going to have a negative long-term effect on all of those teams.
We saw a glimpse of that already this season with Alabama Huntsville, where they had to do a lot of last-minute recruiting after they had a lot of people transfer away, including to Long Island University. And by the way, congratulations to LIU splitting the series with Holy Cross and getting their first win. Garrett Metcalf, the transfer over to LIU, the graduate transfer from Mercyhurst, making 39 saves in that debut victory for LIU, and it was also the first overtime 3-on-3 victory in NCAA play. So a lot of firsts there. Want to mention one last thing. I've been asked a lot about this, about RIT changing its mind last week. They were the first school to announce they were canceling the season. They're also the only one to reconsider that and put on a season. And from what I've been told and what I've been able to gather from people around RIT, the credit on that all goes to the players, particularly the seniors on that team. When they found out what was going on, they started a petition drive, but more importantly, they were able to set up a meeting with the administration, including the college president. And from what I'm told, a whole bunch of them pitched in round the clock, and they put together a presentation on why they should be allowed to play that was apparently extremely impressive, kind of blew the socks off of the people who saw it. And a week later, just minutes before Union canceled its season and a day after RPI canceling the season, RIT said, well, okay, we're going to go ahead with this. We're going to reconsider, but we're going to be very cautious about it. I have to really take my hat off to the student athletes who put that together and made the case.
It's so difficult, and it takes a lot of effort on the part of the student athletes and the coaching staff there at RIT to be able to understand a lot of stuff that's, over a lot of people's heads. None of us are doctors. None of us are epidemiologists. We're usually people that are either players, coaches, broadcasters, whatever, of hockey. So for them to put together, what was a compelling plan and change the mind, it's not easy. These decisions are not just being made by athletic directors. We all know that. And I've heard, multiple commissioners say that they've never felt college presidents as involved in things that are happening as they have been this past summer. College presidents usually leave their nose out of athletics. It's usually a negative thing when you see them, but it's not just presidents. You have boards of trustees, and I'm sure that the decision to cancel the hockey season at RIT was something that went right up to the president's office and probably was discussed among the board of trustees. It's not something that's taken lightly. So to be able to change the minds of a college president and maybe some trustees, that's pretty impressive for some young men and women student athletes. They did a fantastic job. And,
they're just like every school involved in college hockey. I have zero doubts that the players are doing everything asked of them and going above and beyond to try to get a season in. As I told a friend when I heard about this, I said, if they had to sleep on cots in the arena under armed guard, they would do it to get a season in. And I have no doubt that that's what the men and women playing college hockey are committed to do to get a season in.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, having talked to a few coaches, they don't have any problem, in my opinion, with the student athletes following what they're supposed to do. And that's the big positive, because, that's what we hear about. Oh, they're college kids. How are you ever going to be able to, tell a college kid what to do and actually be able to enforce it? You certainly can sometimes with athletes. They've been put in a lot of structure their entire life. And, they understand you don't follow the rules, you screw up, you lose your season. Anytime a college kid in the past, has done something wrong, especially a student athlete, maybe your coach sat you for a game or two, or, in extreme circumstances, maybe you were thrown out of school. But for the most part, discipline is not usually, we're taking your entire season away. And that is kind of what this discipline comes down to at this point, because if you screw up and screw up badly, it'll be too easy to pull the plug on these seasons. So I think these student athletes know that, understand that.
Well, as you mentioned, neither of us are doctors, but one of the things that I've been hearing is that even when people take all the precautions, you're going to have people catching the virus no matter what. So if you see players that end up testing positive, you can't cast aspersions at them. They may have done everything right. As one analyst of this whole thing says, virus gonna virus. There's it's gonna get in there no matter how hard everybody works. So definitely do not suggest that players somehow deviated from protocol. It's too hard to tell where people are getting it, even if they followed everything to the letter. Well, I would think with that, we'll wrap things up for this edition of Weekend Review. Have a great Thanksgiving. We'll resume regular podcasting next week for USCHO. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of US College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.